Hello everyone, my name is Connie and I am the debating officer at Middle Temple. I'd just like to know, can everyone hear me? You could okay, brilliant. So very big welcome to you all. Thank you for attending our third and final workshop. And before we begin, I'd just like to let everyone know that this workshop is being recorded. It's good to see a few familiar faces as well. So for those of you who missed the previous workshop, it is available on the Middle Temple Students Association YouTube channel, if you want to check it out. The theme of that workshop was thinking on your feet, where we in particular discussed points of information and rebuttals. That aside, for any newbies here, I would like to bring to your attention the Monroe Cup debating tournament, which will be held on Saturday the 26th of June. So after all of our exams are out of the way and we've perhaps got a bit more time on our hands. And it will be a virtual debating competition. You will, of course, if you sign up, receive the rules in advance, and you'll obviously be randomized with a partner. So, as I said, you know, it's going to be a lot of fun. It's a great way to get involved, build your CV, and of course it will look good whether you're applying for a bar-related position or not. And of course, the winners will receive something, and that is a £200 gift voucher to the Legal Tailor Shepherd and Woodward. The competition will be judged by barristers and debating royalty, so whatever your outcome, whether you win the tournament, whether you do not, you will receive excellent feedback, no doubt. And, you know, I cannot stress enough, competing will be very good for your CV. So it's a lot of fun. As I said, just join in if you feel like it. And also, I will be circulating a sign-up email in the following weeks, if you haven't already, that is. So moving on, today's workshop will be split into two parts. The first part will be briefer, where I will be discussing stylistic tips and the general debating no-nos. The second part of the session will be the very fun debating part. So I'm just quickly going to admit a few more people on before I begin. Okay, brilliant. So without further ado, let's proceed to the first part of today's debating workshop. Stylistic tips. Now, in competitions, what you say is usually more important than how you say it. Certainly in parliamentary style debating, the team that wins is the one which presents the most compelling arguments for their side. More focus is given on how well structured and how well analysed your argument is, an argument which can robustly shield from attack. But nonetheless, I have to say that audiences can be swayed by persuasive style, and the ideal speaker will have both. So there are certain things that you should consider with regards to your speaking, and I'm going to point out 5 ones which I think are key. The first question is, are you appealing to listen to? You have to make sure to modulate your speech and vary your tone at important points in your argument, changing your volume and speed. An audience certainly will probably tune out from a speech delivered at the same level throughout the duration, usually monotone. And it's very easy to do because sometimes you get caught up in speaking and all you want to do is just say the words that you've got to say, and you don't necessarily think about how your speech sounds from an audience's point of view. But again, another tip is be prepared to speak more slowly than usual, because you have, more often than not, quite a few people in the room who are trying to follow everything that you say. And again, slow down your speech at the important points. Now, one thing to note here is that you should certainly avoid, or try to as best as possible, the ums and ahs when you hesitate. Simply turn those hesitations into pauses. So the second thing you would want to consider is your body language. Some people can have mannerisms that irritate audiences and judges, distracting from what they're actually saying. You could be making the most compelling argument that has ever been made on the subject, but no one will consider it if you're overusing your hands, if you're swaying from side to side, if you're walking from one end of the room to the other. Other examples of bad body language would be putting your hand over your mouth like this when you speak. For example, jangling something in your pocket, maybe like keys, or even scratching your head or scratching your leg, scratching your elbow. I've seen it all before. Like I said, it's very easy to do, but if you have this in mind, then you're more likely not to. On the contrary, good body language will show a comfortable stance, using gestures to emphasize what you're saying, not to distract from it. And most important of all is eye contact and your audience. They will be watching you and they want to engage with you. So eye contact is imperative. It becomes very easy not to provide that crucial eye contact if you're following notes, if you're following, a speech rather than very brief notes. Indeed, in parliamentary style debating, which is the type of debating that will be used in the Monroe Cup, you will only be given 15 minutes to prepare prior to the debate. So your speeches by nature will be notes rather than a fully blown, comprehensive, verbatim speech. The third thing you want to consider is humour. Now, I have to say, humour is a bit of a difficult one because all audiences do appreciate humour, although some adjudicators only appreciate a certain type. Remember, debating is not a stand-up comedy and jokes should not be used at the expense of content, and certainly not to offend your opponent, even if it's a slight dig. Remember that you're attacking the point, you're not attacking the speaker. That said, to be on the safe side, I would generally avoid joking at all because most of the time it goes down like a lead balloon. So just be wary of that. The fourth point to consider is your use of rhetoric. And you have to think carefully about the sorts of rhetoric that you use. And in fact, don't feel obliged to overuse the traditional vocabulary of debating, such as worthy or honourable or eloquent and so on. Modern audiences, and I say this with conviction, are quite scornful of the cliches, and you'll tend to be more convincing if you speak in your own natural dialect. Which leads me on to the fifth point, accents. Now, categorically, do not put on an accent or speak in a way that you think you ought to. I've seen it done before and it's cringeworthy, but it's a bit of a mockery when someone does that. Simply be yourself. And many of history's finest debaters have strong speech impediments or regional accents. So don't feel as though you need to put on some sort of debating persona in order to debate, because that's by no means the case. So having considered those 5 points about stylistic tips, I'll now move on to some general debating no-nos. And I have actually created a video on this topic, which is on the Middle Temple Students Association YouTube channel. But in short, here are some no-nos which haven't already been covered in this session, and you should avoid them at all costs. So the first point is, do not use inappropriate language in your speech. Trust me, I've seen speakers accidentally mispronounce their words and then swear to themselves, but that swearing has been made allowed. And obviously the judge won't miss that. So just avoid any inappropriate language. Secondly, do not speak out of turn or interrupt an opponent. So often, if there are protected time slots in a speech, such as when you're able to ask a point of information, when you're not able to, in that time period, you cannot interject whilst that speaker is speaking, and you will most certainly lose marks if you do. Thirdly, I would say you have to be respectful to your opponents and to the judge. The latter means not publicly disagreeing with a judicial decision. It is extremely offensive. Fourthly, you have to put aside your personal views. Debating is all about being objective. Remember, the most compelling argument will be the most objective and therefore logical one. By all means, it's fine to exert a bit of passion here and there, but remember that you're debating objectively, not based on your personal views. The fifth point is, well, quite simply, do not lie. You should never falsify or create or distort evidence to fit in with your argument. In parliamentary style debating, the internet is prohibited. You will have 15 minutes to prepare. So I doubt that anyone will be having problems falsifying information because you won't really have access to it. It may be quite tempting to make something up due to that lack of information, but just avoid it at all costs. Sixth, don't disagree with obvious truths. For example, if the opposition states that the sun is yellow, do not protest and say that it's pink. Now that's a bit of an extreme example, but the point here is obvious. If something is obvious, don't disagree with it for the sake of it. And that leads me on to the final point, which is when you do disagree with your opponent, you have to be respectful and do it with a smile. Debating is all about being very polite and courteous. It is a courteous sport, although sometimes it could be a bit of a battle on the field. You have to remain very polite. So that concludes the very brief discussion part of this workshop. So now we will move on to the debating part, which is, I know, the part that many of you look forward to. So firstly, we're going to start with our very quick warm-up session, which is the quick fire debating round. And for those of you who aren't well seasoned to these workshops, essentially the quick fire round involves me firing a motion at one of you. I will then tell you to argue either for or against. So for example, I will say, this house would ban smartphones, and then I would pick Molly Breslaw, argue for. Don't argue for, Molly. You're just being shown as an example here. And then I will then time you for 30 seconds. And once your time is up, I will simply interject and say thank you and move on to the next speaker. So before we begin, anyone who doesn't want to take part in this exercise, please may you turn your camera off so I know who not to ask. And you know, this is a very fun and pressure-free environment, so don't feel as though you have to participate in any way, but by all means, if you want to observe, do, and if you don't, then let's get started. So let me just pull up my quick fire rounds here. Right. Okay. Jennifer Davies. This house believes that Coca-Cola is the best fizzy drink. Please argue against. Go. Oh, Jennifer, I believe you're on mute.
I would suggest that Coca-Cola is not good for your health on the basis that it's packed with acids that dissolve your teeth. It's also addictive. People can become so hooked on Coca-Cola that they wouldn't consider drinking anything else. And this is, by way of it being monotonous, is also seriously unwise.
Thank you, Jennifer. Oh, apologies if you weren't finished.
I went round a Coca-Cola factory in Germany where I was at boarding school, and we were shown a film about the effects on your teeth, and we were offered Coca-Cola at the entrance and Coca-Cola as we left. Of course, we loved Coca-Cola.
Thank you, Jennifer. You actually did go over there, but I was quite intrigued by that story. Okay, so let's go with Sharon Bogle. Sorry, I know your full name is on your screen, but I know you as Sharon now. So we will have, this house believes that success is measured by money. Please argue against. Go. Sharon, you're on mute. I'll start that again. We can't hear you. Sharon, I'll come back to you. No, we can't hear you. I'm just lip reading at the moment. It may be your earphones, but I'll come back to you until you get that sorted. Okay, so this house believes that success is measured by money. Please, can we have Molly Breslaw argue against? Go.
Success isn't measured by money. It could be measured by education. It could be measured by grades. It could be measured by how you're seen in society, by your peers and your colleagues. It doesn't just revolve around money. Your success could depend on doing a task that you've set your mind to, and it's personal success. And it doesn't have to be for a profit. It could just be that you've aimed for it all your life, and then you've completed it. So that's a success for, and that defines success for them.
Thank you, Molly. Your time is up. Next, we'll have, this house believes that we are living in a big brother state. Please, can we have Timothy Hutchinson argue for? Go.
We are indeed living in a big brother state, and the reason for that is that there is more closed circuit television on our public streets and public spaces than ever before in the history of humankind. And whilst this may be argued that it keeps us safe, it actually has the effect of controlling and inhibiting our personal freedom.
Thank you, Timothy. Next, we'll have Edith. Please, can you argue against the motion, this house prefers cats than dogs? Please argue against. Go.
Well, obviously, dogs have been seen over time to be man's best friend, and we've seen dogs be involved in activities with humans since caveman times. They've helped us hunter-gatherers, they've helped us individuals fight and gain food and grow and prosper together. In a way, you could see dogs as sort of the hand that held humanity towards civilization.
Thank you, Edith. Your time is up. I am a fan of dogs myself, and they are man's best friend, so I would agree with you there. That's me being personal, don't do that. You have to be objective. So the next person we will have is, some of you don't actually have your names on your screens. Could you please just double check that your full name is that your full name is entered into, well, on Zoom, because some of you I can't actually see your names. So I'll move until, yeah, okay, you're showing up now, brilliant. Okay, so this house would ban makeup. Jalal, please argue against. Go.
I don't think this house should. Well, I don't think makeup should be banned because many people use makeup as a way of expressing themselves. People use makeup as a way of beautifying themselves. And if makeup were banned, it would prohibit people from finding ways to express their identities.
Thank you, Jalal. Your time is up. Next, can we have Jessica Clucas? This house believes that Disney princesses are bad role models. Please argue for. Go.
Disney princesses set a standard for young girls and boys everywhere, which is completely unrealistic, with unrealistic body expectations, and majority of them end up having to marry well, which isn't a particularly good message in the current circumstances in the 21st century, and also beautifying women to an extent where they have to wear dresses and look beautiful rather than their intelligence and their education.
Thank you very much. Olivia Rawlings. This house believes that age matters in relationships. Please argue against. Go.
This house believes that age does not matter in relationships. Certainly it's true that the older we get, the smaller an age gap can be felt. And personal preference is very important. And if it's just your preference that you prefer somebody younger or older than you, that should be a valid reason to be able to be in a relationship with them. It also could be the case that a younger person might enjoy taking care of an older person in a relationship.
Thank you, Olivia. Your time is up. Victoria Iabuno, hope I've said that right. This house agrees with electric cars. Please argue against. Go.
Whilst electric cars are in some ways meaningful for society, in a lot of other ways they can be quite devastating for society. When we talk about electric cars and the need to green up our space, we have to really also consider the ability for people to be able to afford electric cars, and actually how electric cars are being used in inner city living, and how that's affordable for ordinary people. And us, it's our view here on so it's not our view.
Thank you, Victoria. Your time is up.
Thank you.
Let's have Ivan Teo. This house would rather live in the countryside than the city. Please argue for. Go.
Testing. Can I be heard?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi. Thank you.
So this
This
house
house.
would rather live in the countryside than the city. Please argue for.
Right. This house will believe that the countryside will be much better than living in the city. In comparison, that statistics has shown that there's almost in every country, the crime rate in city is always much higher than country. There's also a factor of the environment, given the fact that there are low density areas of factories or with motorized vehicles using fossil fuel in the countryside compared to the city. While there may be a slight downside of certain forms of entertainment.
Thank you, Ivan. Your time is up. Let's have Jenny Routledge. This house would abolish Valentine's Day. Please argue for. Go.
Valentine's Day may have started as a way of celebrating your relationship with someone else. However, this has been completely taken over as a commercial venture, leading to lots of sales of unnecessary and unwanted products. Further, it puts pressure on those who are not in relationships to make them feel that they are in some way less valued or less important than people who are part of a couple. And it can be a peak time when people feel lonely and disconnected from society. Therefore, it should be banned.
Thank you, Jenny. And lastly, let's have Luna. Luana, apologies. Please can we have you argue against this house would prefer to be famous? Please argue against.
So this house disagrees, or this house believes that being famous is a good thing. It puts a lot of pressure on one individual, and it tends to damage their mental health a lot, as a lot of famous people go through a lot of mental issues, and they go through a level of scrutiny that is too high, and instead of having kind of a shine line on an individual's actions, instead of looking at the wider society and how they behave.
Thank you, Luana. Okay, so I believe that we've got through everyone who had their cameras on. So now we'll move to our main floor debate. But before we begin, I should probably give you a once-over of the rules. Right, everyone should be able to see this. Can I have a nod if you can? Brilliant, okay. So I will go to here. Right, so everyone should be able to see this, which you've just confirmed. So this is how our mini debates will run. So as you can see on the screen, you will be given a motion and the topic to be debated. For example, it could be this house agrees with voluntary euthanasia, or this house would ban private schools, or in the case here, this house would ban zoos. I will then assign teams and you'll be given 15 minutes to prepare. Apologies, let's make that 10 minutes to prepare. There are two sides, the proposition, also known as the government, and the opposition, also known as opposition government. The proposition supports the motion, and the opposition, as you'll guess, speaks against it. Each team will have two speakers. The team that wins is the one which presents the most compelling argument. Internet, of course, is prohibited, and as this is a mini debate, each speaker will have 3 minutes in total to speak. For the first and last 30 seconds, it will be protected time, which means no one from the opposition can offer a point of information. I will signal when you're out of protected time and when you're back into it by knocking. So can everyone hear this? Okay, great. Yes, so with regards to point of information, you offer it during the time you're able to, and you simply say point of information, and then the speaker who is speaking can either reject or accept it. When you've finished your speech, even if it's before your 3 minutes, simply say thank you and we will proceed to the next speaker. After all speakers have given their speech, the floor will be opened up to questions. So for those of you who perhaps don't want to participate in the debates, or for those of you who aren't involved in the first debate, you can ask questions to either side. I, as chair, will then decide on who the winning team is, who presented, of course, the most compelling argument, and I will say why. I will also be timing your speeches. Okay, so moving on to the second slide, our first motion is this House agrees with the enforcement of a COVID-19 vaccination ID card. Again, if you do not want to participate, please do turn your camera off so I know who not to choose.
Sorry, just a quick clarification question. For
Yes.
floor questions, there's no time limit, is there? As long as it's reasonable, basically.
Yeah, just a reasonable time limit. Okay, so for the proposition, can we please have Jenny Routledge? And also, may we have Luana? Apologies, I'm trying to look at the screen at the same time. Okay, Luana. And then for the opposition, please can we have Jalal? And with Jalal, please can we also have Charan, yeah. Okay, so I'll leave this screen up here just so you can look through what roughly each speaker should cover. I'll leave it up there for a couple of minutes whilst I sort your breakout rooms. So take down notes if you need to. And I'll let you know once I have sorted your breakout rooms. What we will do whilst we wait is have some more quickfire rounds, but instead we're going to do a versus quickfire round. So for example, I will say, Jennifer, please can you argue for or in proposition of banning smartphones? We will hear Jennifer for 1 minute, and then we will have someone directly respond to that in opposition, okay? So again, if you do not want to participate, please keep your video off. Right, I can see that there are a few of us here. Okay, so we'll begin. So Timothy Hutchinson, please can you argue for this house agrees with boarding schools?
Boarding schools prioritise education in a holistic fashion. Education is not just about turning up to school at 8:30 a.m. and leaving at around 4 or 5. It's a full experience that goes well beyond the classroom into one's social development, one's ability to explore creative interests, sporting endeavours, and all of that is allowed for at boarding school in a way that a day school simply cannot compete with. There isn't enough time in the day in the strict timetables that a day school has to incorporate that really holistic education. And also, it encourages young people to become more independent, to be less reliant on mum and dad, and to move forward in their lives.
Thank you, Timothy. Your time is up. And please may we have Olivia Rawlings argue against boarding schools?
There are several reasons why boarding schools are bad and shouldn't be allowed. The first main reason is that a child misses out on so much home life. When a child goes to boarding school, it could be difficult to adjust, difficult for the child to adjust when he comes back for the holidays. And holidays are so short that by the time they're back and might have started to adjust, it's then time to go back to school again. And this dichotomy could really affect their growing up, their nurture, and also affect a parent's relationship with their child. Boarding schools can also be intensively stressful. They have lots and lots of rules, very little free time.
Time is up. Okay, please can we have Jennifer Davies argue for, in proposition of, this house would ban cycling from the roads?
Cycling, unfortunately nowadays becomes more and more hazardous. I think this is largely due to the fact that everybody is always rushing everywhere. Motorists find it quite difficult to focus on the road ahead, at the same time keep an eye open on what's going on to either side of the vehicle. I know this both as a cyclist and as a motorist, that failing light, crowding, rushing can lead to serious accidents, and it happens far too frequently. I do believe they should be kept off the road for their own safety.
Thank you. And please, can we have Molly argue against that?
This house believes that cycling shouldn't be banned on the road because it benefits people's health. In COVID times, this is the only thing that people could do. They couldn't go out of their house, so cycling was the only thing that could bring them enjoyment and the only form of exercise that they were really allowed to do while the gyms were closed. Also, there's lots of safety regulations and bike lanes that allows them to be safe from road users, and if they follow the rules of the road, then there's no reason why they shouldn't be safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's have Victoria. Please argue in proposition of this house believes that schools should have armed guards. Please argue for. Go. Oh, you're on mute, Victoria.
Schools should have armed guards, and the reason for that is pretty clear. Schools nowadays, we need to be extremely careful about the children's safety within themselves, as young people within themselves around the school, but also protecting them against any threats that may occur from outside of the school. So if anybody was to be unfortunate enough to fall victim to any type of terrorist attack or anything like that, we've seen that is a possibility in other countries. And of course, with the rise of youth violence in inner city schools as well, there needs to be some sensible approach around how schools are protected. Another reason why it would be a good opportunity, well, a good idea to have
Thank you, Edith. Thank you, Victoria. Your time is up. So, Edith, can we have you argue against that, please?
I'd like to first start off with a very troubling statistic, and one that is quite joyous for the UK side. That in America, we have school shootings almost bi-weekly. In the UK, there's been 0 so far this year. If we have armed guards, you're essentially putting in the opportunity for a situation where a school shooting could occur. Someone is not going to be able to commit such crimes and heinous incidents without the opportunity being there. And the opportunity exists when you have armed guards. At this very moment, the Firearms Act limits even these armed personnel carrying it unless they have a lawful purpose. We believe that that should be the only reason, and we see no lawful purpose here in arming schools from a perceived threat that could cause even more damage later on.
Thank you, Edith. And that was quite a difficult ground to argue, so thank you. We'll have one more debate, so quick fire round. And let's have Timothy again. This house believes that the monarchy is outdated. Please argue against.
The monarchy is an institution that exists beyond social norms and conventions. It has been embraced by differing societies over centuries. And that continues to be borne out in the tourism statistics within the United Kingdom. The monarchy creates a great deal of tourism interest in our nation and is a source of joy for many, many people up and down the country. The monarchy also provide excellent role models for young people, particularly nowadays, with members of the monarchy speaking out on important issues such as mental health. And this really inspires.
Time is up. So Ivan, please can we have you argue against, apologies, for the monarchy being outdated?
This has argued that the monarchy is indeed outdated, as history has shown that the monarchy has been a huge hindrance to the republic. On one side, the country itself, such as the UK, with its own civil war happening more than once. One point that monarchies in the modern era are merely this group of people who leech off the public's taxes as they spend on the money on clothes and traveling as shown by the current monarchy family. And they're not necessarily good role models, being Prince Harry a prime example of that. Another issue is that the monarchies men currently don't really have a specific role in the administration system, as they are heavily regulated by our laws as well as the government regulations, such as the Queen or King, though of course currently Queen Elizabeth II, has to consent to nearly every bill that the UK Parliament passes in a legitimate voting session. Thank you.
Thank you, and you're right in time. Right, so everyone should be joining us now. Great. Okay, so we are ready for our first debate. I hope that I have everyone here. Yes. Okay, so the first debate is: this House agrees with the enforcement of the COVID-19 vaccine. So please may we have our first speaker for the proposition or the government, Jenny Routledge. And when you begin, I will start the timer.
This House agrees with the enforcement of the COVID-19 vaccination identity card. To define this, the identity card, which could also be, for example, a smartphone application, would show a person's status regarding COVID vaccination and also potentially any reason why this person could not have a vaccination, for medical grounds, for example. The card could be used to access services or to travel or for issues around employment, particularly in certain sectors where this is very sensitive. Public sector bodies would set by example by ensuring that these were always necessary and used. So, for example, were you to wish to go to the job centre as you were entering, you would be required to show your card or smartphone app. Private sector companies would be allowed to decide whether they wish to use this in their own businesses. However, it's suggested that given the example of the public service and the fact that this would become overwhelmingly typical, many businesses would opt to use it, not least because there may well be serious implications around, for example, insurance, were they not to. The main reason why this card is not just a good idea but essential is that vaccination is, as we can see now, by far the strongest method for reducing the virus. There is still a serious public health issue and strong measures are necessary to reduce transmission. Whilst such an app might be a minor inconvenience, the alternative would be the restrictions such as we are experiencing now of lockdown, massively reduced contact with others, and an inability to access services in person. For these reasons, the card is a minor inconvenience, but not a serious restriction on liberty, and very, very important for that reason.
Thank you.
It's essential.
Oh, apologies, I thought you finished. Please continue.
Sorry, yes, that was my final point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So now we will have the first speaker for the opposition government, which is Jalal. I'll start your timer when you begin.
So we're against the COVID vaccination ID card and think it should not be allowed because it removes the freedom of choice and negatively impacts liberty. It would be compulsory. It would make it compulsory to take the vaccine for people who may not want to or be able to for health reasons. And it could lead to a further breakdown of our rights. And a question that should be asked is, what's next after an ID card? What restrictions or what would be made mandatory on people after this ID card? A second point in arguing that an ID card should not be allowed is that it could lead to discrimination. People could be discriminated against on the basis of not having cards, even if they aren't able to, for health reasons or for other reasons, or simply if they didn't want to have a vaccine. The risk of causing further inequality in society and creating a new social hierarchy is clear from introducing these cards. And those are my points.
Thank you, Jalal. Okay, so if we can have the second speaker for the proposition, Luana.
So I'll be arguing in the sense that I agree with the enforcement of the COVID-19 vaccination card. And I would just like to point out some of my opponents' points.
Yeah.
So we would just like to say that removing the freedom of choice can't be a valid argument, because right now we are being removed the freedom of choice by not being able to leave the house, by having to wear a mask and being compulsory into going. I would say in the opposite, that having the vaccination card would actually allow for our freedoms to begin again by being able to leave the house, and by being able to go meet your loved ones and hug them instead of having to stay at home and protecting yourself. As my colleague said, the vaccination will not be compulsory for people that have specific health reasons, and the health reasons will be told in the little card. So they'll be given a card that says to why they can't take that. So that discrimination will not be allowed. That will avoid discrimination and allow for people to still be able to have a normal life if they can't have the vaccination. I would also like to point out that private businesses and the private sector would be up to deciding if they do want to enforce it or not, and how they choose to enforce it. They would still be able to go on their day-to-day basis, depending on what the businesses decide to do with their business, of course. And then I would add on to my colleagues' points that this would actually encourage a lot of people to go back to their normal life. A lot of people right now are scared, and because they have illnesses, underlying illnesses, they are very at risk. And this stops them from leaving the house and going back to doing the things that they would normally do. So this would actually encourage people to go back and to not feel scared. And therefore, it would offer another kind of freedom to these people. I would just like to make the summary of my colleagues' points and minds. We think that there should be a COVID-19 vaccination identity card, because it is still important to fight it, even though there's been reduction on cases. As we can see, we've had 3 lockdowns, and as soon as the cases go up, we have to lock again. Vaccination, like my colleague said, is one of the strongest methods that we have to reduce it, since masks is clearly not doing it. It is still a massive problem and we have to look at it. I would give an example that in Africa, you have to have the vaccination for yellow fever before going into certain countries in Africa, and this hasn't stopped.
I have to stop you there as your time is up. So please can we have the fourth and final speaker for the opposition, Sharon Bogle.
Thank you. I will address the rebuttals in line with my 2 points, which are against the enforcement of a vaccination card. Firstly, my point of privacy, and to oppose my colleagues' arguments, having an app that outlines whether you have been vaccinated and or the reasons why you are not able to be vaccinated is against someone's right to privacy. Nobody needs to know the reason why you cannot take a vaccine. Nobody needs to know your medical issues that prevent you from having a vaccine or whatever reason. And in terms of the app itself, you showing somebody at a restaurant or you showing somebody at work to say that you are vaccinated, again, it's privacy. You can't work without showing the vaccination card or the vaccination app. Again, it's breaching privacy. Some people may just not want to tell the world that they've been vaccinated and just get on with their lives. And my second point is the ineffectiveness of actually having a vaccination card and or app, as was suggested. If we look at the Test and Trace app, millions of taxpayer money went towards developing this app that proved to be quite ineffective and reliant on people inputting their own negative results themselves. And even if that does happen, how are we to really see who has taken the vaccine or not if people can input false results? And with that being said, the money it takes to develop this app as a little card for something that ultimately will be relatively temporary, it seems disproportionate. That amount of money could go towards health workers. It could go towards giving the NHS a pay rise and people on the front line, their dues. And the vaccination card in the proposed form and the vaccination card in general is ineffective, as it could lead to discrimination, as my colleague had mentioned. And the stigma of not being vaccinated and being vaccinated could divide society into two. And that is something that should not be encouraged. And having people having to show that they have been vaccinated, going against the right to privacy, just makes the enforcement of the vaccination card unfair.
Thank you, Sharon. Your time is up. Okay, so firstly, I will open the floor for any questions that any of the audience members have. Let's go with any questions for the proposition who agree with enforcing a COVID ID vaccination card. Yeah, Edith, if you'll go first.
My question to the opposition is quite a serious one, to be fair. It was something that was mentioned by Luana, which kind of concerns me. I'll repeat her words to begin with. It would not encourage them to not feel scared. It would, in essence, show them that, oh, I've been vaccinated, I am therefore safe. What is the opposition's argument to this of putting people into work with these identity cards under this false assumption that not just because they're safe, not necessarily the people around them are safe? I myself have just been vaccinated, and the actual application form that comes with the vaccination card and the evidence from AstraZeneca vaccines says it has not yet been tested whether or not you can pass it on after receiving the vaccine itself. My question to the opposition is, what is this vaccination identity card going to do to those who have not been vaccinated but otherwise affected due to the jobs then undertaken by those with the vaccination identity cards.
So I believe, was that a question to the proposition?
Yes.
Okay, if anyone would like to take that.
I can answer this if my colleague is happy for me to take it. As you mentioned, having just had the vaccination, this is very much work in progress. And as you mentioned, this is not a solution. However, as I outlined to begin with, part of the reason for the vaccination card passport is to maintain awareness of the fact that this is a real and pressing issue. We are not seeking in any way to suggest or try and persuade people that this is a solution in itself. It's an important public health measure, and at this point, the most relevant one that can be taken.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for the proposition? Yes, Molly?
Yes, my question for the proposition is, it's taken a long time already for people who are like of the older generation or ill to already have a vaccination. So is it fair for people like my age who are at the lower priority to have to wait to be able to go out because I don't have an ID card?
Whoever wants to take that.
I can take it. So I think the eventual goal would be that everyone would be vaccinated and therefore everyone would be free to go. There would obviously be policies in place that would not allow that to happen. So you would still be able to go out, but probably or likely that you would still have to wear a mask and still have certain restrictions and still have certain rules into place for you not to be able to be affected or for others not to be able to affect you. The outcome would be, the goal and the objective would be that everyone would be vaccinated at some point, and then no one would have the restrictions that are in place right now. And if it does come, when it does come to the point where some people are vaccinated and some people aren't, there would be policies in place then to avoid those things from creating discrimination.
Thank you. Timothy, I believe you have a question.
Yes, my question for the proposition is, how do you intend to deal with the risk of vaccine ID card forgery or fraud?
Any system is, of course, open to the potential for fraud. If we look at, for example, travel passports, it's perfectly possible to manufacture, for example, a driving license which is reasonably anti-fraud. Clearly, there will be, sadly, those who choose to try and get around the system. So we're not suggesting in any way that it would be completely foolproof, but there's no reason why it couldn't be as effective as any other form of identification.
Thank you. And do we have any questions for the opposition? Even if the proposition maybe want to rebut an argument they made, raise a point in relation to their arguments.
I can make one.
Yes.
Point to the opposition here is, do you think there would ever be a time where a vaccine identity card would be appropriate?
I mean, if you look at vaccine ID cards' purpose, it's to say that you have been vaccinated. And I think that particular card is quite temporary in nature, because once everybody is vaccinated, everybody's vaccinated. That's the whole point of vaccine. So would it continue to be necessary, say another 2-3 years down the line, if everybody, say, is vaccinated this year and vaccines start to roll out? You know, we know when babies are born, they get the BCG vaccine or the MMR vaccines as well, to implement the COVID vaccine for that. I mean, you can't be giving out vaccination cards in the same manner as we're giving out vaccination cards for adults now to young children. So temporarily, a vaccine card could be helpful to allow people to go out and do things and travel, especially to different countries. But again, I honestly believe it's just a very temporary measure. I hope that answers your question.
So, okay, I think that concludes the first debate, and now the decision boils down to myself deciding on who presented the most compelling argument. So I'll give you very quick feedback. In general, I have to say that all speakers, I was quite impressed, to be honest. Firstly, when you stood up or sat to speak, you mentioned who you were arguing on behalf of, proposition, opposition, and you stated why exactly from the outset. And I think that that's very important because your debate is then very easy to follow. You all mentioned very solid points, particularly the proposition. I love how you clearly defined the motion. You said you were going to use an app. You were saying what the app would show. And then in conjunction with that, the second opposition speaker, Luana, further backed those arguments up, and you addressed the rebuttals extremely well as posed by Jalal, which leads me on to the point that these were very good rebuttals which you raised, the most relevant perhaps when considering any mandatory measures. For example, freedom of choice, what about our freedom? And you also brought up discrimination. Charon as well, I mean, your rebuttals were very good. Instead of countering the idea of a vaccination ID card, you countered how they intended the proposition to enforce it through the app. So I found that really, really encouraging to hear your point of views on that, because you really did undermine those arguments quite well. However, I would have to say that the most compelling argument I felt was given by the proposition, because you very clearly defined how you were going to enforce the vaccination ID card. You responded well to rebuttals, particularly the freedom of choice rebuttal as given by Luana. And also, Luana, I liked how you summarised the proposition's argument, and I feel like that was missing in the opposition. So for that reason, the most compelling argument, and therefore the winners of the debate, is the proposition. So that being said, we'll move on to our second debate. And okay, can everyone see the screen again? Okay, excellent. So the next debate is "This House regrets the rise of social media and believes that measures must be taken to restrict access to it." So for anyone who, again, doesn't want to participate, please do turn your camera off so I know not to ask you. So for the proposition, please can we have Timothy? And may we also have Edith for the proposition. Okay, and for the opposition, please may we have, okay, so as long as some of you don't mind participating again, firstly I'll put Molly for the opposition. And who out of those that just participate want to participate again, if I could have a show of hands? Jalal? Okay, brilliant. Oh, I'm sorry, Jenny, Jalal just beat you to it. Okay, so right, now comes the tricky bit for me. So I'll leave that screen up here and I will try and hopefully do the breakout rooms again. Okay, so you guys just have a moment to stare at that and I will put you into the breakout rooms. So I'm opening the rooms now. So we'll do some more quickfire rounds. Okay.
I just had a quick question, if I might, Connie.
Sure, Jenny. Yeah.
Yeah, just because it's absolutely ages since I've done any formal debating. Around points of order, because there are a couple that occurred to me as we went, but I wasn't really confident on the procedure for it properly,
Okay,
or
sure.
exactly what kind of things I could use as a point. Because there were a couple of points the opposition were making which I felt were misrepresenting our case.
Yeah.
So presumably that would be an appropriate point to do, wouldn't it?
Yes. So
do I ask them a question or do I make a statement?
You could do either. You can interject, obviously, if it's within protected time. Really, it should be around these 10 seconds, your point of information, so very quick to the point. But if there's any point you want to raise, then you stand up and say it. I would just say, be sure not to do it so often. And of course, your opposition speaker, if you're firing points of information at them, they're not going to accept every single one. But yes, it can either be a statement or a brief question on the point that they're talking about. Okay, so let's get to our quickfire round. Right, so we will have a to and from quickfire round, so a versus quickfire round. So I will ask one speaker to argue either for or against a quickfire motion, and then we will have a direct rebuttal from someone else. Okay, so firstly, let's go with Charon. This house would only tax the rich. Please argue for.
Taxing the rich is beneficial to society as they obviously have a larger income and can help support the individuals who do not come from such an affluent background, to support them through their journey to becoming more established themselves. And without any assistance from the taxation from the rich, then there would be such a big divide between the rich and the poor, and that just is so counter-conducive to society functioning.
Thank you. And please, can we have Jenny oppose that?
Taxation of the rich sounds appealing as a broad motion, however it is inoperable. It would require defining exactly where rich was, and as we already know from, for example, an upper band of tax, people will go to great lengths to avoid coming in just at that point. So were we to say, for example, that taxes begin at £100,000, I can imagine an awful lot of people begin earning £99,999 per year. Taxation on a sliding scale is far fairer and more realistic, and whilst I can see that the burden should be more heavily on richer people, it should not have a cut-off that is that bleak.
Thank you. Okay, so let's have Luana. This house supports restricted free speech. Please argue for. Hey, you're on mute.
So this house believes that we should restrict free speech. This house believes that free speech sometimes and often is used in a wrong manner by being able to discriminate and insult and do a lot of hate speech. And they just call it free speech to be able to have that gateway into saying whatever it is that they want to say to insult someone or hurt someone.
Thank you. And please, can we have Charon rebut that?
So this house believes in free speech, and there are already measures in place to police free speech in the context that you've given, hate arguments and hate crimes stemming from freedom of speech is a crime, and there are regulations on restricting freedom of speech, but largely freedom of speech is that somebody should be able to express themselves in the way that they should within a reasonable manner.
Thank you. And Jenny, this house supports veganism. Please argue for. Go.
This house supports veganism as the only realistic way that the increasing size of the planetary population will be able to feed itself without putting undue demands on the Earth's resources, which are being significantly stretched. It's shown, for example, that the amount of carbon emissions from beef cattle is one of the most serious emissions crises in the world. It's essential that we address the way that we eat, as this is something that can be done on an individual level as well as a national and global level to make a real difference to the state of the planet. Secondly, it's essential that we consider the welfare of animals. As science progresses, we become increasingly aware that animals have feelings and emotions, and it is becoming increasingly clear that eating meat is cruel and unnecessary. And for those reasons, it is highly contested that veganism should become the norm.
Thank you. Luana, please can you rebut that, argue against it?
This house believes that veganism shouldn't be mandatory because it would infringe our human rights severely on our way that we live and our lifestyle. Everyone can decide what they eat the same way that you can decide what you wear, and no one should have a say in that. Even though I do take into account that it would be better for the environment. There are studies that show that if we take away if everyone stopped eating meat at the same time, we would have so many cows and animals that would still be alive because we are overproducing them, and it just wouldn't be sustainable for us to be able to do it from one day to another.
Thank you. Okay, Sharon. This house believes in telling white lies. Please argue for.
Telling white lies is a natural human reaction when you are put in a situation where you don't feel like the person on the receiving end would be able to handle the bare-faced truth. So as opposed to being a white lie, it's a slightly embellished version of a truth that you know somebody is more inclined to hear. And white lies or embellished truths are not harmful to people or society, and it just allows everyone to be a bit more compassionate and a bit more sensitive to other people's feelings, which is very important.
Thank you. Luana, I saw that you let out a laugh there, although you were on mute, so we'll have you argue against that.
Am I arguing against?
Yes, against white lies.
This house believes that white lies should not be said because even though it would protect a lot of feelings, it is a gateway to bigger lies. And if you are ever found in a white lie, then your character will be put into question, because if you're able to tell a white lie, then what stops you from telling a bigger one?
Very good point. Okay, Jenny. This house believes in aliens. Please argue for.
This house believes in aliens. Just because we haven't yet seen them does not mean that they do not exist. We can see from, for example, advances in quantum physics that the ideas of things always arrive well before the actual visible proof of them. It is extremely Earth-centric to suggest that if there were aliens in other places, the first thing they would be doing is trying to find us here on Earth. There is no reason not to think that there are whole other universes going on perfectly happily who are quite able to exist without the need to interact with us.
Thank you. And please can we have Sharon argue against that?
This house does not believe in, I'm arguing against aliens. Sorry, this house does not believe in aliens, as this is a product of fiction that has been highly dramatized and popularized by Hollywood and the media. There hasn't been any substantial concrete evidence to suggest that there is life beyond beyond Earth, and to suggest that there are aliens without any facts is somewhat tenuous.
Thank you. Okay, let's have Luana. This house believes that summer is better than winter. Please argue for. Go.
So this house believes that summer is better than winter because there is a lot of more activities to do. There is a lot of studies that show that people tend to be happier in summer because it is so sunny outside. You can just go for a walk and feel the wind. Therefore, this house believes that summer is better than winter because of how many things you have to do out there, and you can just wake up and go for a walk in the sunny side or go by a bicycle ride instead of getting wet every single time you walk out of the door.
I feel like you're really living the moment there, Luana. Don't worry, summer's nearly here. And please, can we have Jenny argue against that?
This house believes that summer is not better than winter, despite the pointing out that it can be cold in the winter. I would wish to remind everyone that there is no such thing as bad weather, only the wrong clothes. There is extreme comfort to be gained from putting on a familiar woolly sweater, a cosy hat, your favourite gloves, a warm coat, and going out for a walk in the snow in a big pair of boots, coming back in again, sitting in front of the fire. The Swedish have the phrase hygge. They have entirely institutionalised keeping cosy in the winter. That is something that should be embraced all over the world.
You're on mute.
I think you're on mute. Yep.
Oh, apologies. Yeah, so that concludes our quickfire round, and the others should be joining us in 8 seconds. I have no idea why there's a lag there. This isn't fixed. I'm just helpless with Zoom, as you can all probably tell by now. Oh, here they are joining us. Okay, so for our second and final debate of the evening, we have this house regrets the rise of social media and believes that measures must be taken to restrict access to it. So please, can we have our first speaker, Timothy, take the floor?
This House regrets the rise of social media and believes that measures must be taken to restrict access to it. And there is a major reason underpinning this. It concerns grave threats to society at large. And we clarify from the outset that this is not an outright ban on social media. The meaning of restrict in our proposition is that there will be introduced an independent regulatory body, not controlled by the government, who have a higher authority to remove content that is deemed to be a grave threat to society and to restrict access in these limited circumstances only. So when it comes to our definition of the word access, we are not talking about the everyday person's ability to download a social media app and to engage with it in those day-to-day harmless ways. We are talking about access to content that is deemed, in limited circumstances, to pose a credible threat to the public. And the final term to clarify is what we mean when we talk about social media itself. And we are referring here to online content providers. For example, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We are not encompassing within that definition journalism in the form of the printed media or television. Now, if I may move on to the limited circumstances under which the regulatory body proposed would have the authority to restrict access. These circumstances include where social media is used as an incitement to violence. Secondly, where social media is used to plot terrorist attacks or conspiracy to commit a bombing. We may have in mind at this point the 7/7 bombings that London experienced in relatively recent history. Thirdly, circumstances including hate speech and discrimination. And finally, sexual harassment. Social media is a rapidly developing area, and this House posits that it is important that social media does not overtake us, but that we stay on top of it. Thank you.
Thank you. If we can have the next speaker, Molly Breslaw, for the opposition.
Thank you. This House does not believe that more measures should be taken to restrict access to social media. So in response to my colleague and in opposition, with regards to incitement of hate and rallying people, social media is a good platform to actually combine communities and not incite hate, but to rally and include groups of people with similar views. So, for example, for this, social media was used recently for the Sarah Everard protest, which rallied a lot of women and lots of people in society together in order to protest against a horrific event in society, and it was for a good cause. It wasn't to incite hate, it wasn't to inflict violence, it was to inflict and share sexual harassment that is going on in society and share his views with the rest of the public and the rest of the domain. Furthermore, if social media is restricted, it's really difficult in COVID times when the only platform we have to integrate with people and interact is through social media. And if this is restricted, it may prevent people who have not been on it before from using it because there's too many rules, too many regulations. So they may not want to go onto this social media platform and they will lose contact with their loved ones and their family. This could cause a huge impact on mental health. Mental health has risen significantly since the recent pandemic, and further restrictions and isolating people further from society will just cause further mental health issues. Social media through the pandemic has been used for AA meetings, it's been used for support mechanisms, for people with depression, for people with mental illnesses, and it's been used as an outreach to get to these people. Without this platform, we wouldn't be able to integrate with these people in society, and it could lead to further mental incidents and risk suicide in the most vulnerable in society. Furthermore, social media is extremely informative. If you're like me, on Twitter, you follow barristers and informative people who like to share their recent cases, they like to share their recent news, and it's really difficult what incites hate and what is your definition of a threat, because some things may come up as a threat, but it just might be a barrister explaining their case, so people and colleagues can understand what experiences that they have faced. Thank you. I think that's all my points.
Thank you. So we will now have Edith as the second speaker for the opposition.
Thank you. I would just like to start with a quick rebuttal, which I feel would help with the opposition to better clarify the stance of the government here. We are not looking to restrict and impose rules and regulations on everyone. These are no more restrictive than would necessarily be in place if you were out and about. I'd like to first start with the idea that it supports really good communities on social media. The government is not suggesting it does not. That is not the point that we are regretting. The point we regret is the other side that we see to social media with other particular groups. These particular measures will not and do not affect those supporting the rallies like those of Sarah Everard, and in fact will do more to help the women who may not necessarily have come forward when it comes to issues of sexual harassment in other cases because of the stigmatism that seems to be at this point with the police. I need to also stress the point that it's an independent regulatory body, meaning that in terms of who would decide, it would be down to the people. We would be essentially bringing on a team of representative individuals of the community, of the United Kingdom as a whole, who would be assessing this and looking at this particular content. It would not apply to every single individual in day-to-day life. It would apply to those extreme circumstances where we could all agree there is a severe threat to an individual or a group, for example, with particular terrorist attacks that are being plotted. In terms of mental health depression, I'd like to bring up the point that there are groups like anti-trans groups which help contribute to some people's mental health decline, and we as the government want to help address this by making sure those groups which actively target those people cannot do so anymore. In terms of the points raised for our sort of group as well, in terms of the anti-Semitism arguments, it will also help in terms of the Parliament side of things, because as we can see, there's been quite a strong rise in terms of anti-Semitic behaviour in sort of government and sub-governmental offices. The example that comes to mind is Tony Robinson joining as an advisor to UKIP. Now, we as the government do not condone people who hold such hateful views to a group, no matter whether or not they stand as public office. And we want to use these measures to make sure that no one is above the law. No one is above these particular morals that we all hold. I'd like to...
Your time is up, Edith. Thank you. Okay, and please can we have our fourth and final speaker? So for the opposition, Jalal.
This House would oppose the motion to restrict access to social media. And the reasons are because social media is used as a source of information, it's used for businesses, it's used in people's everyday lives, in their personal lives, personal and social lives, as a form of communication and networking. My colleague, I just want to rebut an argument that my colleague made about the possible harms to society through inciting of violence and terrorism. There are already restrictions in place for most social media platforms. Most social media platforms have restrictions as to age. There are laws and censors that block, and there are already organizations within or who are employed by social media platforms to monitor and censor any offensive or potentially dangerous material that may cause harm or incite hatred.
Information.
Yes, I'll take your point.
Is my learning friend aware that these particular measures, I refer in this case to Facebook, have also been sort of so unsuccessful that they've actually taken down groups that have been promoting for the anti-racist groups? I refer to him in part into the marches that had occurred for Black Lives Matter and the anti-protest marches that then occurred afterwards. Facebook actually deleted the groups for the members who joined the organization before.
That's a very good point. Now you're arguing to restrict access to social media and to, if I'm correct, introduce an independent regulatory body to monitor the people's behavior. That's exactly what Facebook was doing in that case, in the case that you mentioned. And my question is, a rhetorical question is, what would
kind of information?
what would this, I'll take it in just a second, what would this independent regulatory body do? Would they be under the same kind of pressures as Facebook? And would they, how transparent would they be? Would that organization be? And would it make decisions like Facebook does in regulating content online? I'll take your point.
You can't take the point, you're in protected time.
Okay, so moving on, as my colleague Molly said, in a post-COVID world, social media is a source of comfort. There are schemes now that social media platforms are introducing that allow people to self-report any content on social media.
Thank you, Jalal. Apologies, but your time is up. Okay, guys, so do we have any questions for the proposition who argued that this House does regret the rise of social media and believes that measures are needed to restrict access to it? Do we have any points, or do we have any points of rebuttal from the opposition? Yeah, Jenny, go for it.
Would the proposition have banned the suffragettes from Facebook?
So anyone can take that. Yep.
Obviously, we at the moment are looking to deal with social media as sort of a growing new age, sort of in terms of growing new age concerns. When we employ independent regulatory sort of body, it's not necessarily just a whole vote system. Just because everyone's voted for, everyone thinks X position, we're not just going to vote for X position. There will be discussions within this body to then sort of discuss these issues. So if I bring it back to the point of the suffragettes, we would have representative bodies within that sort of organisation, which would have, for example, people from the suffragette movement, people from the other side, and after sort of coming together and looking at those arguments, they would then form a decision. What that decision may be, I can't personally attest to, but it would be a decision made by the people.
Sorry, I was on mute. Molly, yeah, go for it.
I just wanted to say, who would these people be? Does the government have a say in who these people are? Are they voted in? Who gets to decide these massive decisions on social media and what is right and what is wrong in society? Do the people and the public get to vote these people into these bodies? Or are they just randomly people that are selected for these roles? Because it wouldn't be fair or just if it's just random people selected. It should be people deciding, and it should be a whole group of society. You wouldn't be able to fit lots of representatives in society in one small group of people to regulate Facebook or social media.
Yes, I agree. This is a very valid point. And one of the key issues we're seeking to address is that the people currently responsible have a vested interest. The only people who can remove content and restrict access are the corporate social media managers themselves. And this is what we say must change. So we would not propose a completely randomly selected body, but rather a group of individuals representative of society who do not have a vested interest in the social media companies themselves, either as corporate managers or stakeholders in some way in those corporations.
Yes. So sorry, can I just have a show of hands again? Oh, quite a lot. Okay, we'll have Jenny.
Do we not already have a body which is as representative as possible of the UK population as a whole in Parliament?
answer that one. Okay, so you are quite right. We do have a body representative in Parliament. The issue that sort of arises out of that is we do not have a representative body within these international, transnational companies. These companies have, to some extent, autonomy because of their sort of global scale. And what we're essentially trying to do is transplant that sort of representative nature into those companies. It's also a good point to mention as well with these companies, it's not people necessarily deciding decisions. My learned friend mentioned Facebook at that point. I would like to also point out that most of these companies also use machine learning techniques. So an automated system usually picks up on these so-called groups and will then flag them down.
Do we have any questions for the opposition? So the opposition, yes, Jenny, if you have one, by all means. Oh.
So are you happy that social media platforms can continue to be used by any group however they see fit, and at the whim of the company itself, most of whom will try to say that they're nothing to do with the content that's even on their platform? Who is going to hold either the platform or the posters to account?
My answer to that question would be the social media platforms are already being held to account by government. We saw, I think 2 years ago, the director of Mark Zuckerberg, the Facebook guy, being dragged in front of the an American court, or in front of the American government, to answer questions about privacy. And there is a push for greater transparency from social media platforms. I'm not saying it's what's being done is enough, but we're just arguing that restricting access isn't the solution. Properly governing access to social media is the right solution.
Yes. We'll go with Molly then first.
So I was just going to say, in furtherance to that point, and we're not happy that any group can go on social media. We're not saying every group should be allowed on social media, and that is why Facebook have put this new initiative in, that if you're not happy with the content, if you're not happy with something on there, you can self-report. Like, you can say it's offensive, it's discriminatory, I do not like this content, I do not want to see this content, and that's already on the platform, and that will just keep improving with time. It takes society as well to report these measures for it to be taken down. Thank you.
Yes, Edith?
This is a question for Molly, or in terms of the Facebook sort of position, but it applies to other companies as well. Are you aware of how many people actually have to report in order for a particular post to actually be taken down? Because I'm aware for Facebook it's about 15.
I don't think that's an entirely fair question, given that you're not allowed to have the internet, and that probably wouldn't be in the ordinary man's.
That's not from the internet.
Knowledge.
I've had that from previous knowledge.
Okay, I don't think that's a commonly shared view, unless Molly, you know.
I'm not aware on how many people have to report before a post is taken down, but I know once you do report something to Facebook, they do take the content very, very seriously. I've had to report a couple of things before, and it wasn't shown on the post after that.
Okay, if we can have Charon, please ask your question.
So yeah, this is for the opposition. Aren't you a bit too reliant on these social media platforms to regulate the content that appears on them? I mean, you know, if you like report something that you don't want to see anymore, that's it, you don't see it, but somebody else could, and you actually reporting it for yourself, you're not seeing it anymore. You're not seeing that hate crime, you're not seeing that, you're not seeing anyone incite violence, but somebody else could, and you're relying on the social media platforms, and you're relying on people, being savvy enough to report the content as opposed to just commenting on the content like, this is bad, we shouldn't be seeing this. So wouldn't you say that there should be more measures in place to restrict or to sort of combat offensive content?
Yeah. Again, I'm going to mention the involvement of government and governments around the world in combating issues like what you mentioned. I'm also going to say with crime. So if something is definitely a crime, if somebody is inciting hatred, or something is a terrorist post, then there are laws to govern that. And those, whatever they are, whether it's a post or a message, could be reported to the police, who could then become involved. And in relation to not seeing it anymore, I guess if what Edith says is correct and 15 people do need to report it, you could contact other people and say, well, can you report this with me? That's a possible solution.
Yes, Sharon, if you have another question.
So, I mean, that could be sort of flipped on its head, where somebody could be reported for something that isn't offensive, and for example, you only need 15 people to report their one post. Isn't that it in itself, just discriminating somebody, or bullying somebody? I mean, I know everyone's obviously mentioned like the big crimes and inciting violence and hate, but I just wondered what the measures would be for impacting mental health of individuals, and specifically like bullying and victimization, because obviously terrorism and crime, that's a big thing that we flagged up and reacted and acted on. But what about the mental health side of things, where people are being bullied, but it's not as wide scale as it being a crime? So what measures would the platforms have in place, or what measures would the independent independent regulatory body have in place for that? So I mean, that's like either for proposition or opposition.
The presence of a regulatory body would inspire greater public confidence that social media needs to be used appropriately, even, as you say, in those circumstances where we're not talking about the gravest of crimes, but other forms of harassment and bullying that can affect one's mental health, particularly the young. And I think the public consciousness of that regulatory body would help to minimize those occurrences of what we might call the kind of lesser harms of social media, but still equally valid. So it would be a deterrent, if you like, without directly restricting access in those specific examples that you mentioned.
Can I also say, in the examples that you mentioned, I think restricting access isn't a solution. So would we be restricting bullies from accessing social media platforms, or should we properly govern them? I think what you're asking is how would posts like that be governed? And this independent body would restrict access. They are arguing to restrict access. And if they were restricting access, would we end up like countries like China, where they have the Great Firewall, where all social media platforms are completely restricted, except for government-owned ones? And I think we'd be heading in that sort of direction if we did have this independent body.
Do we have any final questions?
I kind of want to ask something, but I think it's for the proposition, but I'm not kind of sure. So I wanted to ask, so we kind of looked at more direct things of like hate speech and obviously terrorism, so things that can really affect you directly. But there's like a rising illusion with social media and the way that it creates unrealistic lifestyles that everyone sees, and they're having a really big effect on mental health around the world. instead of kind of helping and making people feel worse about themselves because they see this image of someone living their best life. Would that be addressed or restricted in any way?
I can answer this one. I mean, it's a completely fine question. Honestly, there are no dumb questions when it comes to sort of the encompassment of social media, because social media covers everything. I would say because it's so indirect, it's definitely something we could look at, but it's something that would definitely need we'd need to look at further sort of the impacts and sort of causes, because obviously with something so indirect like your entire outlook on life, we'd need to look at sort of the evidence on what specific harms are caused by what specific sort of lifestyle aspects and choices that have been shown. But obviously, once such evidence is sort of shown and we understand it better, that's definitely something we could consider.
Okay, so thank you everyone for participating in that debate. It's certainly lively. So I didn't do this in the last debate, but can we just have a show of hands who agrees with the proposition that social media essentially requires further regulation? And the opposition? Okay, thank you very much. Right, so we have 5 minutes left, so I'll be very brief with the feedback. I have to say all of you gave very clear, concise and well set out arguments, particularly Timothy. I mean, you defined that motion very, very well. And ultimately that did put the proposition in a bit of a difficult situation. So I suppose you should have been perhaps a little bit fairer than defining it too narrowly. However, I do think that you defined it very well. I have to say you're very well spoken, you're very engaging, very easy to follow as a speaker. Edith as well, you've got very good voice modulation, great eye contact. You pick up on the opposition's points very well, and you rebut them and use them to your strengths. For the opposition, again, both of you very well spoken, very well structured arguments. You rebutted the proposition effectively. However, when it comes down to deciding who presented the most compelling argument, I would have to say it's the proposition here, because although there were some holes in the argument which were later discovered, I just wish, for example, Molly, you just hit the tip of the iceberg when you said at the end of your speech, what's meant by a threat, what's meant by hate, and I wish you developed that. You only later did that in your question where you said, this regulated body, they're unelected, who are the individuals? And I would have liked a few more questions from the opposition, such as, how will they be regulating it? Will it be 24 hours? Will they be seeing posts from people's accounts that don't necessarily flag up hate crime or terrorist activity or hate speech, but are just normal day-to-day social media posts? I really do wish you would have encouraged that point there, because if you would have, I would have awarded it to the opposition, but I feel as though the proposition clinch it here. So well done to the proposition for winning that debate. And that brings us to the end of our debating workshop. I know it's been 2 hours, but thank you for those who stayed and as well who participated. I really enjoyed your presence as well. I hope that you all enjoyed yourself. Excellent. Well,
I just want to apologize. Sorry.
Oh,
sure. I just want to apologise on the 15 report thing, because it was literally something I learnt about a day before this on an LBC like broadcast, because they did something on council culture.
That's no worries at all. So obviously there are no further sessions for the end of this academic year, but like I said, we do have the Monroe Cup debating tournament, and if you are interested in participating and you haven't already, on your event link there is the debating@middletemplestudents.com email. Please do email me your interest. In any event, however, I will be sending out a sign up email form in the coming weeks. So thanks again to everyone. So yes, everyone, I hope you have a wonderful evening, or what's left of it at least. And I hope that I will see some of you in the Monroe Cup. Any questions about debating whatsoever, please do get in touch with that email. Okay? All right, thanks guys.
Thank you, Connie.
Thank you. Have a lovely day.
You
Nice to meet you all.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.